So,
Should I not record yet? You want to just deliberate first and
yeah, I think the first,
Since I'm up here,
Maybe
must
we
be
can
speaker.
maybe an email goes out regarding the turnout and we have a meeting somewhere.
Yeah, well, so do you want to go through some of the agenda, or would you just, I mean, because a lot of our meeting got chewed up by the ARB.
This is our future,
Yes,
and I think many more should be here to dictate our future.
okay. So why don't we do this? What I would suggest is, Steve did take the time to gather some information up. So we're gonna go off agenda. We are gonna ask you two questions, real short, about doing a couple of mini surveys. We will get your input in terms of what you researched and got information on, and then, maybe open it up since there are members of the public here in case they have just a couple comments or questions that they may have, okay?
So you're going to continue, move forward?
Yeah,
with
I
the
think
meeting?
record this
So we're
for
recording.
now, yeah, but it's gonna be informal, we're not following the set agenda. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about
Yeah, I
what you
can
guys
give you a copy,
gathered,
I
because
have copies, you
went-
just have to make,
you went through the process.
well, I got 4 pages of a report for the police.
Okay.
I will
So-
absolutely take it.
What?
I will absolutely take it.
Yeah, she has a copy now, so I just,
Perfect.
Okay,
I didn't
so,
want to print out $25 worth of ink and
No,
paper,
yeah.
so quite frankly.
yeah, well, you can
So
send us,
I didn't,
if you can send us a file, we can print it out.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, you got it there, and I'll send you the,
Yeah,
Sure.
the same email that when we sent out and asked, like, do you guys
Right,
have
okay.
responses? If you email the document to that,
okay.
we can make sure to have it printed out for the next meeting as
Because
well.
I spent 2 hours at the police department, inside and out,
Great.
with,
Perfect.
several people, so.
So, do you wanna, to give you a little break, Steve, do you wanna start with your, did you have a summary, or you had,
Do you
or
have
no, I can't remember, did you have
Well, Brick
information together?
has more information, and some of the same information about recreation.
Okay,
Because we kind of talked before about, well, the only thing I got out of it, people want basketball courts for the kids, pickleball,
We're doing.
and they talked about maybe places to run or walk or jog. I mean, that's all, that's the only in-depth that I really know about the recreation.
so like a track or some kind of more formal, or like, so
More
like the trail?
I would imagine.
Yeah, like Heritage Trail is
Like
supposed to be
Heritage Trail.
built, you know. But it's just going, I have a grandson, he's 13. And even the police say basketball courts would be, now there are basketball courts in Mays Field, but Blooming Grove actually owns it, but we lease the property from them.
Mm,
But I think you just said they put
No,
some,
I think it's different, I think we own the property, but Blooming Grove manages the parks,
okay,
because they
okay,
have the facility,
okay. And there are basketball courts there.
there is,
that's
I
right.
just redid them, I think, last year.
Yeah, because the police were, they mentioned that as well,
It's
basketball
basketball
courts
courts,
and,
young
And
men is
what's
very
also,
big.
I mean, I pass it every day on Ahern too.
We're in the process of putting in pickleball courts at the old hockey rink right now. We just paved it,
Where is the
Or-
old hockey rink? Sorry.
by Ahern, on Ahern.
So one of the
Vern Allen
benefits
Park.
of now having this is that I can bring up a map. And I can collect data.
Yeah.
So first you were asking or mentioning, Maysfield, right? So that's Maysfield,
Right.
and I can select Maysfield, and it says that the owner is Town of Blooming Grove, right here.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, these are like the basketball courts.
Correct.
So I can bring up an aerial.
What are they putting in behind the old candle store? They're flattening that out, is that the
So here you
pickleball?
see the courts.
No, the pickleball is by,
Are they
is the old hockey rink.
I mean, are they in bad shape
We're
or?
paving
No, they
half of
just
it
redid
for
it last year.
pickleball courts,
They-
and the
they're
other half
playing.
is gonna
Yeah,
remain
Okay.
They
for
have
bike
a
riders, ski,
police have
whatever.
property.
We're also doing the skateboard park,
And where's the skateboard park again?
Woodfield,
Where?
park at Woodfield, Woodfield Drive.
Woodfield Drive.
Woodfield Drive and Ahern Boulevard.
I mean,
So that's being repaved. We are removing and putting back the current equipment,
Like
but that
Brotherhood
current
on the other
equipment
side of
will be
Brotherhood.
replaced with newer equipment once we can afford it.
Okay, so here's Ahern, and here's Brotherhood right here.
Nope, you gotta go back right. That little street there is,
Let me just, I'm sorry, let me zoom in. Wrong way.
Woodfield, is that right?
So this is Ahern, this is Brotherhood Plaza Drive, north, you need to go this way?
yes.
There's Washington.
No, it's by your house, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's left.
It's not, below, it's up there.
You cross north,
Here's
that's
Woodland.
Woodfield, so in here?
So that's, yeah, that would be right in here. 201 there.
Yeah.
So what's in there?
1, 2, 3, there's softball fields there, there's a softball singular field, there's a skateboard ramp, and there's a child's playground area.
So that's right here?
Yep,
That's it. That little square is the skate rink, and the square to the right is the playground.
So here's something interesting, because this is what I've been noting. This shows up as Village of Washingtonville, right? The ownership.
Yep.
This piece
Yep.
is showing up as Woodfield Corporation.
Correct.
So what is Woodfield Corporation? Because they definitely still have ownership. I'm guessing that they were the developers of the neighborhood, but I could be wrong. We've been wondering what Woodfield is, because a lot of the open space, a lot of these amenities are showing up in an ownership that's not the village. Seems to be still privately owned, and I think it'd be useful to understand, is that just an HOA?
Bonnie, I can clarify.
Okay, that'd be
It
great.
is.
It's
The
an HOA.
HOA owns the green area.
But it's a public, is it a public use or is it technically a private? Because that's when
That I
you're getting
can't
into gray
answer.
area of like,
So
let's say I want to go.
According to the county, it's in the name of, I actually have it somewhere, but it's, I believe Woodfield.
So if it was an HOA, there would be an HOA board of directors, and they would be made up of
We have a
the people who are from the development that was created.
I'm one of them.
Okay,
I
so,
live in there. Here's the
so-
problem. We
okay.
have the board. But the president of the board moved and nobody took over. So there are some, issues right now. Nobody's taking
so there must
control or
be,
responsibility.
there must be some bylaws, or there must be something with Woodfield
And there
where
are.
it says who has to be members.
Bonnie?
Yep.
See this here?
Mm-hmm.
That's a well at Washingtonville. We're supposed to develop and then it stopped, and it's kind of in the process of collapsing.
Right here?
Right, yes. I know when I ran Little League, the building there was Washingtonville, we had to get a permit every year to operate our concession stand in there, so. I don't know where the lines blur. My understanding, going back over 10 years, was that it was some kind of lease for building Woodfield
Yeah,
development.
yeah, my biggest concern is only that it's constituted in a way that it's clear, that it's a not-for-profit, and that someone couldn't decide to sell it.
Correct.
And so I don't know, just be useful to understand what Woodfield Corp is. And the reason I bring this up is because there's a development down in Suffern that was constructed Bon Air,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And in Bon Air, there was areas and properties that continued to be owned by the people who own, I think it's part condominium, part rental. There was area that was supposed to be open space. When it was zoned, when it was developed, designed, that area is gonna be open space. There was a private restriction that said that there was an area that was going to remain as recreational. The developer came back in and proposed new housing on it, even though it was supposed to be recreational. And we raised the question, and they said, well, only people who are party to that private restriction can enforce it. So it got developed. So, you know, a lot of the open space in the village, especially the, let's say, eastern side of the village, the eastern side of Brotherhood, you know how they have all those sinuous little parcels that are behind the houses?
Yes.
That is owned by the village of Washingtonville. That's area that wasn't developed, that must have been clustered, and is owned by the village of Washingtonville. But the portion of Washingtonville that was developed in this other area is all part of Woodfield Corp.
Yes.
And so I would love to know, is there a deed restriction, is there something limiting, you know,
And I
what could
believe
happen in
there's
the future?
also Moffett, it's the same builder, it was Rieger who
Mhm.
developed.
So all of this is
And Moffett
Rieger?
Ridge also has a green area that also, I believe, is owned by their HOA, separate from Woodfield.
So where would that be? We're
So
gonna-
that is in between Woodfield Development and Newcastle.
Okay, so,
They're
Here's
similar
Hager.
looking structures where some may be attached, some are detached, they're called ours are called carriage homes. It's the same, they were,
Stonehill, so it's,
it's called Moffett Ridge.
so this is Moffett Ridge, where Stonehill Apartments is?
Well,
Maybe it's the
Stonehill
Alexander?
is not part of Moffett Ridge, it's right by Moffett Ridge.
So it's this area in here, maybe? These smaller lots?
Let me see.
Alexander, Valley
Yes,
Pond?
yep, that's all Moffett.
Okay, so if I click, this looks like it's open space, right?
Yep, yes,
Because it was clustered, so if I click on this for ownership, I get nothing. So then we go here.
Actually, I believe this is Woodfield.
One other thing I
The
just
green
remembered.
area in Woodfield.
And-
I don't know if this helps you at all.
Yeah.
It's when we were trying to determine ownership, actually. This came up.
Yeah, it's just, that's all I got.
So we have a lot of the ownership
Yeah, I
data.
like handball, basketball.
It's,
Walking pass, all that.
And
Baseball, basketball.
There's another one in the High
Pretty
Road,
much about it. The rest
the
of the
newest
stuff.
development, also
I don't know,
Rieger.
you know,
that that's
homes
about to be
and
dedicated.
Pays for it,
The roads have
How
not
we-
been
how you get
dedicated yet, we're in the
loans,
process right
grants,
now.
whatever.
And it's the
so, you know,
same
But,
scenario,
okay.
so
you know,
a lot of green
the
area
police
there as
are,
well.
Don't see a serious problem at this point.
So right now, it doesn't wanna, for whatever reason, the server's not happy, so it's not coming up. But again, I think it's just how is this corporation constitutionalized, or constituted? And are there restrictions, are there things that protect it? Because when we look at the zoning, if this is residentially zoned and it became private, and there were only private restrictions that no one enforced, in theory, you could develop on it. So it'd be better from a zoning perspective, if it was HOA land, if it's intended to be open, we could create a zoning district that is called like open space zoning district. And that would encompass all of the properties that are owned by the village, that are parks and open space, as well as different parcels that were created that might still be in an HOA type situation.
Also, a lot of those, like the one to the right is wetlands,
Is here?
yes.
Yeah, I was hoping this would come up with the ownership. Normally it does, but,
And I believe behind where I am is wetlands as well.
It's around Woodfield,
yeah.
Around
there's a-
Woodfield, McLaughlin, all behind Woodfield and McLaughlin,
and
there's quite a bit of,
what, and
Land
prove
there.
it to you every day.
it is wetlands. I mean, I was told, I'm clear in that it was not to be developed.
Right,
yeah, that's what I'm looking for right now. We have a wetlands map.
yeah, so this is showing you floodplains, and this is, I think, these are the DEC wetlands. So, but in as much as there may be wetlands there, you know, let's say this is in Woodfield ownership, there is some area that's still developable. So, again, yeah, we could bring it up. Should I bring up the land use maps? So one of the things we did was we updated the land use maps And,
So we'll be having a package today.
Yeah, so
correct,
really quick, before we fully go into everything. Just so you guys know what's in your packet in front of you. So you guys would have had the ARB information. So you can set that aside for right now. Then you'll have your agenda for this meeting. You should have 3 maps. So you're gonna have 2 transportation focus maps. That's gonna be an AADT one and a functional class one.
Land use.
And then your 3rd map is gonna be the one that's on the board, that's your land use and zoning districts map. So if you notice on this one, it's showing not just the land use, which would be the colors, but the current zoning districts that you guys have in the village, which are gonna be the red outlines. That's why you have like R, MHC, and RA, and that kind of thing. Also in your packet, you guys should have your I&A sections for the land use and zoning, and the housing section. So obviously, we won't get to really dive deep into those I&A sections, but Bonnie's gonna talk about the, land use and zoning districts map, which is the one on the board. Or I can talk about it.
yeah, so you'll find in your packets, and again, because we took so much time with the ARB, we won't get into it, but you can read up on the various land uses that exist now within the village. And what we've done is we've overlaid the zoning districts on top of the existing land use. So anywhere you see that green, that's showing up as open space in some form. It might be undeveloped, it may be some recreation on it, there may be a utility building on it, but overall, it's set aside as open space. And so again, you can see that wonderful system. I think it's wonderful to have this system that's behind many of the houses, like behind Hampshire and Somerset and Washington Boulevard, Newcastle. That's all, either open space recreation. The RA area in this corner is the park. I believe that's the town park. And, so one of my comments was, and especially in consideration of the fact that you have this land that's kind of privately owned, but it's really supposed to be an HOA. If this is all open space, all this green area, you could create an open space zone. And you would take those same, Woodfield parcels and put them in an open space zone. And you might allow principally open space, recreation, and you may allow utilities like a stormwater basin or a water supply well, because some of those facilities are on these parcels. And in that way, if there was a change down the road in ownership, the zoning is controlling that you can't just build houses on it, and they would have to make a pitch to be able to do that. So,
So if I'm reading this correctly, where we were talking about Woodfield over there, right? Here it's showing me, obviously, a park's open space in the beginning, and then behind it, it's orange, which would be 3-family residential.
this piece here,
According to this map, yeah? Yes.
this piece. So yes, so that's right over here, I believe, this piece.
Correct.
Right, so if this was working,
And that's part of the piece where that well I spoke about.
I think that's a different piece. This says the owner is Alma Louise Gregg. So the piece you're talking about is still here, I believe. It's on this parcel.
That's a little further
Yeah.
back,
So if I-
which is wetlands, but that's
Right.
not classified as such.
So if I bring up the aerial
You
here.
can't walk back there.
Yeah, that's probably why there's only really one piece there. Well, and this is a good point to bring up. So here is that lot you're talking about, right? So here's your ball field, here's the well, that's on that one lot. You can't quite make it out, but there's a property line right in here. This must be showing up as the 3-family, that piece right there.
It's technically 4 is 236.
as 230. So if you look at the tax parcel data, it's coded as 230, which would mean it's a 3-family. But, so this is why another consideration for the zoning is requiring that environmental constraints be taken out when you're calculating density. Because if you don't, and you say, okay, you're allowed, let's say multifamily, and you're allowed 4 units to the acre, they're going to calculate based on an acreage of, I can't find an acreage here.
Oh, sorry, it was 2.3.
Yeah, so let's say for argument's sake, it's 3 acres, and you allow 4 units to the acre, you could get 12 multifamily buildings there. But if you, but you're looking at a property that, I can tell you right now, a lot of this is wetland,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
Some of, that's definitely wetland, that's not on the property, but that wetland may continue in over here. And so if you require that they subtract out the wetlands, so let's say, you know, you're left with 1 acre of developable land, you're calculating the density on the 1 acre, not on the 3. Which makes more sense because there's a good chunk of it that you can't even use, so why would you pull density from it?
Right, and so consider that while we're on that piece of parcel of land, is because of the restrictions around it and because of what's around it, can we rezone that as a single-family use?
So you, right now, that lot is RM. So that's this piece here, right? That was that orange. And, yeah, and that's that parcel, right? So that,
This is already 5, but why is the orange?
so see here, this RM, that's the existing zoning boundary line.
Gotcha.
So it is zoned RM. So,
So who makes that decision of zoning, that, the zoning board is the one that,
the village board.
That's the comprehensive board.
So what happens, so this, that's what's,
So RM
that's what
is
we're,
multiple. That's
Yeah.
why, so, and that checks out, because that lot is zoned, is tax-wise, 230, which means it's 3-family. And then when we look at the zoning, which is RM, that's multiple dwelling.
Right.
You see how those like reflect each other?
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to. So the zoning is really, so there's a combination of things, you want properties to be consistent. So where you have a single-family neighborhood, you want to zone it single-family.
Which you can see on your land use map, that entire section on the northeastern portion,
Mm-hmm.
that's all single-family, I believe. Remembering correctly. You see how basically all of those, yeah. Basically all of that is yellow, which in our legend is single-family. So then you see that that's why there's basically all single families.
So here's a situation, and Patrice, you just mentioned this to me, so since we were on the topic, that parcel to the left of the cemetery, 34, 36 North Street,
This one here?
it's sold. It's, if you'll all know it as the large white structure, it almost looks like a castle top, very old looking. It's been vacant for years. It butts right up to the cemetery. That is a multi-dwelling zone right now, residential multi-dwelling, right? So it's the one structure currently. That was bought, and the proposal for that property, originally they wanted to knock that structure down and build 8 townhomes, okay? Large townhomes that spill out right onto Tolman Road, North Street. Picture that, in that one driveway. It butts up to the cemetery. There are issues with the logistics.
this one where that short turn is?
No,
No, okay, it's a different cemetery.
It's not that one?
I'm thinking the station
That's
road.
Brother
I guess.
Oh, sorry.
it's the
Turn-
First
you're on-
Presbyterian Church
Flip around the other
Cemetery.
side of the street,
All right.
right where you were, but on the other side
Oh, on
of
the
the
other
street.
side, okay.
It's North Street. I think it's 36, if I'm correct. 34 or 36 North Street.
So the property we're talking about that's zoned RM is this property here, this house that's next to the cemetery.
Yes, this structure
Yeah,
is
so
right
it's a-
next to the
So
cemetery.
it's across from Brotherhood.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
you-
across from Brotherhood.
Yeah, you can't see it from here, basically, that's what you're
No.
looking at. That's why I turned around this way. Oh, wait a minute.
No.
Is it that property?
That's wetland.
That house they just showed is all the way tucked in the back.
Right,
That's not the one that you're talking
The
about.
one I'm talking about, you
Yeah.
can clearly see from North Street.
Right,
It's
so
right
it's,
front
it's to
center.
the left, it's down that way.
okay. I think this one back in here is the one that's tucked away, because it is
Yes.
surrounded by wetlands.
Correct.
If we go this
That's
way,
the entrance to the cemetery.
You're getting close.
Right here.
this one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the one
yeah.
with the castle-looking peak.
Yeah.
So the cemetery is directly to the right and in the back.
Danielle and I
So
got
that
And to the right of that is also
We
wetland.
did.
But this is why when we talk about
Yes.
the zoning,
Right.
and again, multi-dwelling, what was intended there? This type of a situation, was the intention for it to be maybe a 1 or 2 family, that's multi, it's more than one? Or was the intention for there to be 8 large townhomes, 3-story townhomes butted up against the cemetery
It's
and
orange.
wetlands?
Yeah, so you can see this zoning district wraps around and comes to about here. So it's wrapping around existing R85 zoning. It includes actually single-family lots that are at the end of, I don't know what that street is there. That's a newer development, I think.
Yes.
This extension, right? Ahern
Extension,
to
That's
here.
what we were just talking about,
Right.
that's Ahern that goes into Woodfield.
Right, so these are single family, so in a way, there's no reason why you should keep the RM zoning. And then this is all single family, this is R85. You know, someone once upon a time decided that you should have a lot of multifamily near your, business district.
So
So
this
it-
is actually, was before the board up until, the only reason it's not moving forward right now is because we're in the moratorium. But that proposal was currently before our planning board.
So,
This
So-
had been in progress.
so the reason that we're going through, so the comprehensive plan and the zoning, what it's zoned now, you can change the zoning
We need to,
when it's in accordance with the comprehensive plan, so the whole part of, or one of the main purposes of going through the comprehensive planning process is to look at these various areas. We show you what the land use is, we talk about what the utility capacity is, we look at community facilities and the ability to service various uses, and then we look at what the vision is for the community. What does the community want? Does it want to see
All this
high
gets wrapped
density?
up in a report.
All of this then becomes a document called your comprehensive plan. And the
Mhm.
comprehensive plan is the vision for your future, how you want to evolve and grow. So if you want to, for instance, allow something other than multifamily there, we would have to indicate that in this document, the comprehensive plan, and then we rezone it. So the comprehensive plan, it lays out the reasons why you want to make changes. So, for example, in,
If you want to rezone that, then where does it go from there? It
So-
goes to the zoning board?
so what happens is, you're right,
Stays in this committee?
you are the committee, you're the committee that's preparing the comprehensive plan.
Okay,
You recommend the document to the village board. The
right,
village board is the only board that has the authority to adopt the document.
right.
Just like you can work on zoning, you can recommend it to the village board,
Okay,
they decide whether or not to adopt it, and they can make whatever changes that they want. But the reason they formed the committee was to do the analysis at this level and to have you oversee the process for figuring out what the village wants. The
Right.
village residents, the businesses. So as a total example, you could take that RM area, it's along North Street, and you could say, we like these houses. So one of the sections that we're gonna do is historic and scenic resources. You may determine those houses are 1900s and say, they're historic and we wanna keep them. So, you can zone it for single family, maybe you allow 2-family, but it has, so that you might say, you're allowed 2-family, but you have to keep the building. the way that it is to get the two families, otherwise it's gonna be single. You could also, like they do in many communities, they'll say, we'll let you adaptively reuse it for certain uses, like maybe a restaurant, maybe an office. But it's called adaptive reuse because you're reusing that house for something that you find is okay for that area.
Like Betty's used to be.
Clarify too, with the language in the previous moratorium, before it was revised, these applications that were before our boards were not subject to the moratorium. Since the new administration came in, we made every application before our boards subject to the moratorium. So even if a project was in the middle of, towards the end of, unless they had final approvals,
They get nothing.
they are starting from
Yeah,
square
they
one.
they don't have any, we shouldn't even get into it because it's legalities. But at this point in time, you have a moratorium, which is why we have to move forward with these various studies. Because then, once we have this baseline information, we wanna go out to the public and say, okay, public, this is what's allowed. And this is gonna be very key, looking at this map, for you to understand the zoning and what uses are there. You can look at North Street and say, gosh, there's a whole bunch of single family there, but we're proposing, to allow RM. Now, you may want multifamily, but multifamily,
When I look at it every week, we're getting dumped and every month, and it's just, not that it's overwhelming, I'm just trying to put together in my head how,
yeah,
there's a
now
lot,
it fits
there's a lot
together.
of work here.
Yes,
There's a lot of work here, I mean, to look at a map and,
Right.
rezone or suggest it be.
Right, what
Yeah.
she's, yes, from what my perspective is, I read the information before we get here, so we can have a conversation, then she provides us with information, which then we come up with ideas. And then those ideas, like last month, I was like, oh yeah, we want that, that's definitely, write it down, put it in, they're gonna do the work,
Yeah,
they're doing the work.
You-
We just
you-
need to,
yeah,
as she feeds us information, we need to say like yay or nay, sort of thing.
so we look at the environmental, so we know, well, maybe a property's vacant, but it is for a reason, because there's a big wetland on it. But then we look at the zone and say that big vacant parcel is in an RM district. And if you look at the regulations and you calculate density, even though there's a big wetland on it, you can still have calculated the density over the entire parcel. So you will see in the narrative with land use and zoning, a description of the zoning districts and the description of the land uses you have on this map. For example, one of the things we talked about is accessory apartments. It wasn't quite obvious, the single families that had accessory apartments, so we changed the map so it'd be more obvious. I know I looked at one of the houses where someone had said, there's a single family there, or two family? And in fact, if you look at it on Google, you can see two doors, clearly, two entry doors. So yes, there's something there. Do they all have permits? Do they all, I don't know what the process was, but this is just simply, if we take the property, the tax assessor's information. So on the tax assessor's information, there's, New York State assigns a property classification code to each property. And it'll say whether it's a single family, a two family, a business, it just describes the land use. And that's what we use. And then Danielle and Sam went out into the field to vet, because some of this can be old. There may have been a house that was demolished. There's something new there. So we have to vet it, but then ultimately, you all have to take a look at it and feel that it's representative of the uses of the community. And so this piece here, this land use and zoning piece, is pretty fundamental, because the comprehensive plan will still recommend things like, we would love to build a track, a path, improve it. That's not going to affect zoning per se, but, so there's other purposes for the comprehensive plan, to recommend improvements, to recommend transportation improvements, utility improvements. But what does come out of a comprehensive planning purpose of a process specifically for this one is there's going to be new zoning. And, you know, we have to do it with the reasonable amount of time because there is a moratorium on it. We can't be in a moratorium forever. So,
Can I ask a quick question?
yes, you can.
Stupid. R85 and R100, what are the designations for that?
So it's in your description.
They're both single-family residents.
And so, just so you know, all of your zoning is online. So I'm gonna show you here on the web. So if you go to, if you type in Village of Washingtonville zoning, New York, you'll see something called E-code. And you click on that, and it brings up, this is your zoning code. So actually, let me step back. This is your entire code of the Village of Washingtonville. So if I scroll down here, you'll see that you have various laws and regulations related to sewer systems, retirement, alarms. Here's your architectural review section, chapter 48. You'll have condominium conversions, dogs and other animals. So flood damage is very common, since you have floodplains here. Noise. So if you have questions about noise in the community, there's a chapter on noise.
I actually had to use that. Living at the end of a cul-de-sac, I have green space behind me, and another street off, from another side was at the end of his cul-de-sac, doing construction in his yard. He must have one of those, machines, he's moving rocks around, and he's going, making noises. But then, and he's been doing it for like over a year now, he's building rock walls or whatever. But during the summer now, he's been playing loud music. And so I get up at lunchtime, I work a remote, windows are open, I'm hearing it. I literally get in my car, I drove over, and he had this big speaker on a stand, like you would have at a wedding.
Right.
And I asked him to lower it, but I saw the code, and he's not allowed to play anything louder than goes 60 feet over your property.
Right.
And this is,
Right.
so I just mentioned it to him, and he told me to get off his property, but then he never played the loud music again.
Right. And then,
It's
but
useful.
to carry it further, you can call the police.
Well, I figured I would be an adult
That's what I did. I had this.
first, and,
Yes,
he played it for about 3 minutes loud, and I let him have it.
yeah,
Well, I let it go, but since then,
he's been good.
Yeah.
Good. So, again, within those chapters, there's chapter 175, zoning. And here is where it lists all the different districts. So for instance, here's your R100 district. So that's where we pulled from the narrative what's allowed. There's permitted uses. So if I open that link, it says you're allowed single-family detached dwellings, public parks or playgrounds, community water plant, community sanitary water plant. That's all you're allowed in that zoning district. So if you see other things in that zoning district, other uses I should say, that's not allowed. Now they could have pre-existed, they could be very old uses, or someone's doing something that's not allowed in that zone. But the other kind of real basic element of zoning is this, your schedule of lot and yard requirements. So, well, this is actually the RT district, so I think yours is narrative. Yeah, so most zones actually have a separate table that tells you what all the standards are for a lot. It's yards, it's minimum lot area, but here you have it narratively. So in the R100, if you have sewer and water, or sewer or water, the minimum lot area is 20,000 square feet. If you don't have sewer and water, it's 40,000 square feet. So it entirely depends on whether it's served by central sewer or water or not. Most communities regulate it in that way because if you weren't on central sewer or water, that meant you had to have a septic system and an individual well. And by the time you meet all your separation distances for health standards, you kind of end up with an acre of land. So this talks about, how much coverage you're allowed, 15%. So if someone's suddenly paving the entirety of their property or has a massive building on it, it may not be allowed because it's only 15% of that lot. And so, and if you have questions with regard to, well, what does lot coverage mean? The zoning, all zoning has definitional sections. And so you can go to the definitions and you could look up, before we go get the definition, lot coverage, percentage of the area that's occupied by the area of the building. So if you have 15%, and let's say your lot size was 10,000 square feet, it means you can cover the lot with 1,500 square feet of building area. That's not the paved area, that's the building area. Some communities regulate total development coverage, all impervious, because here's the situation where you can have a building covering 1,500 square feet, but they could pave their entire property, because there's no limit to it. And that has an effect on stormwater. So oftentimes municipalities will either regulate building coverage and lot coverage, building coverage and development coverage, or just development coverage. So you could say, all right, you're allowed 20% development coverage, all your hard surfaces, and so that means paving and building and anything impervious is 20%, so you go up to 2,000 square feet. So, that's something, again, we could change. We could change it so that we're controlling pavement, and so that you assure yourself on a lot you're getting some green space where it's appropriate. Does this all make sense?
Yep.
Is it new and unknown information?
Absolutely.
So, so this is, it's really you as a group, especially if you want to consider the zoning and what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, should take some time and go through this zoning. And again, you have our narrative that we provided, which is a quick summary, but this is where you go if you want to know what's allowed.
Okay, I have just a hypothetical question.
Okay?
Look at all the areas green, which is parks, open space. How, let's say there's a incoming board and has a philosophical difference. Are those protected?
So, the only way to protect,
That's why I said we couldn't make a code for it.
so one is to change the zoning, but even then, if a different group that thinks philosophically different wanted to develop those properties, they could sell their land. In New York State, if something is designated as a park, like formally as a park, you have to go to the New York State legislature to petition to no longer have it as a park.
Or get alienation.
So it's, alienation of parkland.
Yeah.
But,
Do like a section theoretically.
so the other thing though is that if it's just open space, that's leftover land from a subdivision, it's not called recreation, you don't have to go to the state legislature. If you want to ensure that that land is not developed in the future, you put a conservation easement on it and a deed restriction. So that it's a lot harder to develop when there's a conservation easement on it. That runs to some organization, and you have to trust that organization to enforce. Because let's say the conservation easement goes to the village, and again, the village government changes, they can change the conservation easement as well. If it runs to Orange County Land Trust, then that's a different protection, because it's an outside agency whose sole purpose is to protect open space. And you can have it to both. You can have deed restrictions and easements run to different groups. But that's the way to truly protect it. I can tell you, up in the town of Fallsburg, they had a park, and they alienated the parkland because they were gonna allow a developer to come in and build housing there. They were gonna sell the property to them, make some money, do parkland, and construct on the parkland. And that can happen with a board. So again, having an easement, deed restrictions are much more protective. Any other questions?
The RA, I remember, is agriculture, correct?
Where are you?
RA?
Residential and agricultural.
Residential agriculture?
That's what Kazaza Farm is currently zoned RA.
Yeah,
So that's
single
over
family
here.
dwelling and
So in that zoning district,
See, now, the owner of that large parcel, he put up solar panels. It's not zoned for solar panels. Am I wrong or right?
so
Because it's residential and agricultural.
did the owner come in for any approvals? Because there is a way he can do that
Yeah.
without
This
you
has been
necessarily
From my
doing it.
understanding, he's also got money from the state, some
He-
sort of kickback or
Correct.
reduction in something.
So in New York State, the law is that if you build a solar facility, they are exempt from taxes unless you pass a local law that says you're not exempting them from taxes. So many communities would prefer solar to it being developed, so they're okay with solar.
Right.
But one of my towns, Town of Shongum, they passed a law saying, but you're still gonna pay taxes, because you're making money. So they didn't exempt them, so they went to the county IDA to do a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. So they still kind of worked around the town, but the town is still getting some money, as opposed to just allowing it to come off the tax roll. So, if this property is in an agricultural district, meaning a New York State certified agricultural district, because it's a bona fide farm and being
Well,
used
that
as a
gentleman
farm.
was here the last meeting.
Yeah.
He said he was here since 1959 or whatever. He's the one that owns all that land.
Right.
And he, I guess, harvests hay. So it keeps it agricultural. But he took a section out and put a very large solar farm.
Yeah, so you can see it right here on this aerial.
I mean, he also has a home, there's a structure there that he actually just went before the boards, for lot line changes, which those parcels were separate from. So the largest remaining parcel we have in our village, 150 acres, currently for sale by Jim Kazaza. And then there was a division for where the home structure is now. 3 smaller parcels created to be one.
So when I click on this lot, it's all this property. So it has what appears to be cropland, you've got a stream running through here, you have wetlands, you have a lot of buildings.
Is that the one, was it officially subdivided, this one?
So I shouldn't have said, so the one that he just got final
See the little
approvals for,
poles?
Yes.
it did require a
was putting
variance
them in.
because there were
Yeah,
3
that's-
lot line
Yeah, that's
changes.
where
Okay,
he put in a
He
large.
did receive them, and it
So,
was
I don't know whether it was
finalized. I
ever
have the
approved
lots,
or
if you're
whether
interested
he
in them,
had
I have
permits.
the,
It was the previous
yeah, if you can
administration.
give it to me.
I will.
So in New York State, and the point I was making about being an agricultural district, New York State protects agriculture, and they will allow particular uses to occur in particular activities, so long it's in support of the agricultural use. So he could have come in and argued that the solar facility is accessory to his agricultural use, that he's using the electricity.
Well, I
For
don't
his
know
agricultural
where it's
purposes.
going, let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, and so, I don't know, I don't have the history of how that came about, or if there's something in the zoning that allows solar. I mean, we can check real quick.
there was quite a bit of debate about this, and actually Sue Oscar was more on top of it because she lives directly across the street.
Okay, so it looks like there was a law passed in 2018. If I do a search, so when you're in general code, you can do a search on terms, which is really useful. A local law regulating certain solar energy systems and equipment within the village of Washingtonville. So this was passed in 2018. I don't know how long that facility's been there.
What signature was on there?
Not long, that hasn't been there maybe a year, a little over a year.
This is the law. that
They
was-
have to be signed by the town
Oh,
clerk.
Christine.
Yeah, so
The
the
solar
town
farm
clerk
is
has to
already
sign the local laws, but it's passed by the village board.
Correct.
And so you can
Not
see
this
here, collective solar, freestanding, solar installed rooftop, small scale, solar farm or solar power plant. So they specifically added, so take a look here. This is amending. Okay, so this portion of the Village of Washington Village Code, entire chapter 175 zoning is amended. So this local law amended the zoning to allow these uses.
What year, Bonnie? Did you see that?
2018.
It's it's local law 2 of 2018.
Yep.
Now, what's happened is when you use general code, all these local laws, once they're passed, are supposed to be integrated into the overall code book. And what we're finding, and what I think the village board is working on, is getting all those local laws codified, because we happened to do a search here and found it. But it's not built into the zoning, and so when you said, is solar allowed, we were able to at least do a search and see what law passed, and created this ability to put solar in. So, bottom line is, at some point, the then village board passed a law to allow solar. And this also allows rooftop and building mounted. So, for people who wanna put it on the top of the roof, that's the useful part of this, that you can do that.
And it says that, solar farms and solar power plants shall be permitted in any zone as an electric generating use, subject to site plan review and approved by the board of trustees, subject to supplementary regulations. So technically, it's allowed in
Any zone.
any zone,
So you can see here in the law,
but it's permitted by site plan review, like, it's not just a blatant permitted use, they still need to be reviewed. So there is some check and balance with it.
so, so here it says solar farm has to be on a property and it cannot exceed 20 acres. So you can have a solar facility anywhere in the village up to 20 acres. Now, one of the things that's always a concern is that, here you go, so no more than 15% of the total existing brush, trees, and other screening vegetation on the parcel may be removed. Many communities will not allow you to clear cut forest for a
Yeah,
solar
he-
facility.
he-
It's like
He
defeating
cut
kind
that
of
whole place,
the purpose.
that whole corner.
Was clear cut?
Yeah. I know that for a fact, I live there.
Yeah,
He's right at the end of the bridge. He's right on the corner of the bridge, right by the river.
yeah, so,
The creek.
so again, this is
Yeah, they
something,
bulldozed the trees and gutted the whole thing. There's a road that goes up where there's houses on the left, I think buildings on the left-hand side, right off of 208. That's how they got access to it, still do to this day. When you get down past the veterinarian office, you start to go up the hill a little bit, there's a road on your left, and there's a couple of buildings on top.
Right.
That's the road he used for all the bulldozers, the trucks in there, that's the road that accesses the solar farm. And that still is the access road, in and out. So that's where he brought all the trucks in,
right,
and they put all the poles in, and the bulldozers came in, and there were trucks,
right.
carrying stuff out. He's cutting trees and brush, and just, because you hear it cracking from my house.
Right,
And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, what's going on back there? And then all of a sudden, these massive solar farms.
Right.
put out,
So- So I suspect, it's possible that the village board at that time, were confronted with, well, he could develop it, or he could put a solar farm on it. And they probably opted to allow the solar farm.
Yeah, I just wondered who's getting
I'm
the
not
electricity.
saying that's good,
who's getting-
bad, it just is what it
Yeah, it's
is.
just wondering who's getting the power, he's,
Well,
from what I understand, he's tried to put everything but the kitchen sink on that property. Because he owns, that's a large parcel,
right,
You wanna put 65 school buses,
right.
so.
Well,
So I wanted to show you,
But he is the property owner, and if you own that property, and
But wait,
sometimes you gotta
I'm
put-
sorry, time out though. Yes, he is the property owner, but when that proposal came before the board,
Right.
it was not zoned for that. That would, we had that, that parcel, it was gonna be 9.9 acres, was open for discussion about rezoning just that 9.9 acres to accommodate a private school bus garage. So this is why we're doing what we're doing here.
Right, you all have to decide what you think is appropriate, what's not.
Well, the village spoke loudly on that,
Yeah.
200, 300 people, at a public meeting,
Right.
that it was not in the best interest of the residents to have a private school bus garage.
But right now, remember that that property is allowed to be zoned, it is zoned R-A. So it's allowed, anything that's allowed in the RA. The other property, which I also think might be his, is RMHC, mobile home. So, again, these are really, those two properties are probably the biggest properties that you have that could be developed. As much as these look like big properties, it's a school, so that's not gonna develop. You have a lot of land that's an open space, that's not gonna be developed.
Excuse me, Bonnie,
Yes,
I just wanted to mention, yeah, there have been a number of people that have tried to get some support from the land trust and somebody getting all that property. That is the entrance to the village, and it's the view of the village with the whole
right,
Woodcock Mountain and everything.
yeah, so someone could support it, or
Yeah.
they could zone not Washingtonville, in the town of Warwick, they took the development rights off of property. So the town purchased the development rights, didn't purchase the land, development rights. So they can continue to use land for agricultural purposes, but then paid the owner basically not to develop it. So the way you determine that is, let's say you're allowed 50 homes, that's the development potential. So you pay him for the value of what he could have done. It's a lesser amount than if you had to pay for it outright. And then you put a conservation restriction on it, but you continue to allow it as a farm, to continue to operate, so there's some use of it, or it just goes fallow. There's some municipalities that if they really wanted to stay open space, they purchase it. So that means you have to float a bond, over 30 years or whatever that is, and decide whether the taxpayers want to pay for that, Or you rezone it for uses that make sense at the density that's appropriate. It could be residential, it could be non-residential, but again, that whole conversation has to happen with the public and with the committee. And I'm sure that the landowner will of course have their own thoughts about that.
And meanwhile, I have spoken a couple times to Jeremy Schneider, and because Jim DeLon, there was, he was retired and then he was back and then he was gone again.
Right.
And, Jeremy actually said, I think this was about three and a half months ago. He said, try again.
Yeah, and see what happens. And the only thing I will add, based on my experiences, is that you have to be careful of what organization, in as much as they're an open space organization, holds the easement. Because I've known in the village of Woodbury, there were certain conservation easements or certain properties that were bought and paid for by a couple of conservation organizations, and they sold them. And what they say is, well, we're selling them because we want to buy important land somewhere else. Well, that land was still important to the people who live in Orange County. So be mindful of, I'm not talking about Orange County Land Trust. I'm talking about some other larger outside entities that have sold land that was supposed to be open space. It's 8:45. We're kind of over time here. So, take a look at all that information. I think one of the kind of fundamental questions we wanted to ask you is, did you want to start getting some interest going from the public by having a mini survey?
Yes.
So for example, just a simple survey that says, dear residents, get a little information on them, how old are you, generally where do you live, don't tell us, street address, but maybe the street you live on, so we have a sense of where you are. and then tell us what you think are the 3 biggest issues that the village has to confront. And then what are the 3 opportunities you think that exist, where things could happen here that aren't, that you'd like to see happen. And it would just be a way to get to
Do
the
you have a
public.
boilerplate of something like that?
Yeah, well, there's gonna be a more extensive survey that will be done, but this is just to have things on the website that show that there's a group meeting to talk about the comprehensive planning process.
I just don't know who would make the questions, who.
Well, I think for this one, it would be simple, so we would, but,
Okay.
but when it comes to the larger survey,
Right.
that's going to be done with the input of the committee. You're going to help come up with the questions, and part of it may be, again, it's a matter of timing. We could have a workshop where we invite the public in, we have all the maps, and we ask them questions, you know, they give us information, again, on the plan and where they think it should go. After that, there may be some questions that the committee has in terms of where they weren't sure where the public wants to go with it. So then you can ask it in a survey. So, again, these are tools for public participation to make sure the community got involved. But just to kick it off, just to get some sense of what people are concerned about, we can just do something very mini that says, are you concerned about this? And we'll work it with the village board in terms of, is it on the website? How do we make sure the village residents that are responding and not outsiders?
Donna, do you, how
I
about the
would-
newsletter that,
Hold that off, no, I'm just talking to her, you got done.
no,
Oh, okay,
I'm,
I'm sorry, I thought you were just talking about, my apologies.
we have a newsletter for the village?
I mean, we discussed
Right.
putting out a newsletter for other purposes. It's something that we can talk about. We have a board meeting Monday, I will bring it up. Regarding a survey specifically for,
It's just what I'm calling a mini
Small.
survey, just a mini, like 4 questions, 5 questions, just to kick it off, to get people interested.
if you
Drum up
if you
interest.
write up
Yeah.
the survey, we
Right.
have an official Facebook page, I will post it there, I can post it on our website. And once it goes onto our Facebook page, there are 3 other, well-known Facebook pages that most residents look
Well,
at.
see.
And I'll put it in the
Um,
paper.
Okay, in the
So the-
Courier,
So the key though, one of the keys is who's responding. Because, so in the village of Hillburg, for instance, they were concerned about who was actually gonna respond. So because they have a water bill that goes out to everybody,
that was the other, that's
Yeah,
what
they-
I was gonna
they
mention
did
about.
it through the water bill, and you had to type in a code. So it had to be a legit code so that there weren't people who wanted to influence the survey to, now you have something public in the record that talks about, 40 people who suddenly want something that you question, why would they want that?
The only problem with that is the water bills just went out
Yeah,
and they're quarterly.
so
It's
then,
not gonna. be
yeah,
anytime
so
soon.
I think if it's just simply what are issues and opportunities, that's a very simple survey. I don't think we have to worry. When we go to the official, like the bigger survey, more detailed, then I think we would time it with the water bills.
Okay,
And if people do want to respond, and for some reason they don't get a code, they can come into Village Hall.
okay.
Again, depending on where you are, some communities want to control access, others doesn't care. Just doesn't matter to them because they don't expect anybody to, outside the community to have input. But again, I think we'll just do a little survey. The other thing we were talking about is doing a little mapping exercise, which is someone puts a pin, on a location, and we were gonna ask what property, what building, what location is so important that if it was lost, cut down, changed, demolished, it would fundamentally take away from the character of the village. That it just wouldn't be the same place because you lost it. And what happens is, at least the one tool that we've been working with, you put that there, but you can't see what other people are doing. And I know we've seen some other surveys where you can see what other people selected. We can also do this at a workshop, so we can wait. But that was the other idea, but I think we want to solve the question about the right application to apply
I
that.
definitely feel this is the time to get the public involved if we can.
Yeah.
Kind of stoke the interest a little bit.
Yeah,
So, in the case of like the points of interest, the place of interest thing that Bonnie just mentioned, would you guys prefer, just that essentially we don't put time towards investigating something that we might not need right at this moment, would you guys prefer for people to be able to put a point and see all the other points that other people have said? Or do you just want them to be able to put their point and then submit their survey? Ultimately, they'll get access to all of the information. Like, we'll allow the results to be
Yeah.
like public
we'll
knowledge.
provide the results
But
to
it's
you
a
all.
matter of, will they get an immediate, like, okay, 6 other people filled this out, I see where they filled it out? Or do you just want them to worry about their,
Just fill out their
location?
survey.
I like individual pen,
Yeah,
just
so
them
that you
worrying
don't,
about
you don't
theirs?
get influenced by what everybody else is
yeah.
doing.
And that way, it'll be
Okay.
interesting to see if you get 10 people, right, with the same point,
Yeah.
Right.
with the same, we'll say, pin it down, and then what is important about that? What is the name of that place, just so we're sure we know what they're trying to preserve.
And you know what too, I think there's several different environments within our village. My first thought is Brotherhood Winery. Like, that's gonna, to me, that is Washingtonville, right? So you would expect that to get a lot of pins. But what would happen if you took had different areas of, like, over by Ahern, or, you know what I'm saying, like,
Yeah,
do different areas and say, out of this section,
or
which was
maybe,
the best?
or maybe you get to, so you individually get to put in 3 points. You don't have to put one
Right.
in,
Right,
I don't think we need to limit it, because Brotherhood may be the obvious that everybody
Right.
responds to, but then you're not having an opportunity to pick the other 3 that were equally important.
right.
So we could definitely take that into consideration, that it's more than 1 point.
Yeah, for one of the other
Yeah.
communities that I helped shape the survey on, we did it so that they could put up to 3 places. And for each time that they would put a place, a fresh map would load. So let's say they would do their first point, let's say they said Brotherhood, for example, then they would say, I want an additional point. And then a new map would load and they would just be able to look at a fresh new map, and be like, okay, I like this one. And we could still see that one, like, we wouldn't have to worry as much about one person putting Brotherhood 3 times. Because I could look at the data and they put the same, they literally put the same thing.
And then you ask them to label it, or just
Yeah,
literally
and then at the
label
bottom
it.
you have a little, why did you pick this point? And then a
Yeah.
little write-up. And the data is like connected, basically. So then when we
We can create a map, and
present
it'll show
data-
all the, so then we gather all the information and all the points are shown.
Yeah.
So I would like members of the audience, we have a little time, 5 minutes or so, did you have any comments or reactions or anything you wanted to, appreciate that people come here and turn out, anything you want to bring up?
Just because it's my current state of life, of misery, a reminder that whatever you set as rules, leave some space to monitor it throughout. That once you're done with it, you're not necessarily done with it. There's been a plan for a while to put a new substation next to my property. I thought, awesome, I'm never gonna have a housing development next to me. And Marsh Lane across the street has a good chance of staying, and there even has a good chance to be a trail connecting with open space behind me. Great, go ahead. And the guy came in from Orange and Rockland and did his presentation. And he said, yeah, well, the substation now is here, this one's gonna be way up behind it. And I'm like, fine, not gonna be a problem for me. Oh, wait a minute, they put it over here, right on my property line. Stripped the whole 15 acres except one little cluster in the middle of trees. They left 0 buffer right to the, they hired 30 guys come in with their saws to strip everything on the property, right to the stone wall, 200-year-old stone wall that is the property line. And I said, what are you doing? Where's the buffer? Oh, that's the buffer. No, that's the property line. I don't know, they gave us a saw. So aside from the fact that the decibels of noise have given me 3 months of almost constant migraines, they've been asked by the town board supervisor and highway superintendent to do what they can to, that lasted for 2 or 3 days. And it's like telling a little boy with a gun and a stick, you know, don't play with it too much. And they're like really good for a week. And now it's back again. And it means so much to
Well,
me.
they can build enclosures around that are, so that can soundproof them down. I know that for a fact.
The problem with that is O&R is now owned by Con Edison,
Yeah.
and
They're telling me that it could take 1.5 years.
Oh, yeah, they'll wait until you're dead before.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, number one, in a way, if I can find ways to tolerate it, it's worth it for the town and the area, that area is gonna remain beautiful.
have you thought about planting trees around it?
I have trees, but it's very interesting, this could be useful in the future for you. The fact that I have about 40 trees along my side of the stone wall, when they're working where those 40 trees are, it's hardly bad at all. But where they've cleared everything from their back, which is adjacent to my bedroom and living room, and they work there with 3 bulldozers and a massive drill and
Now,
jackhammer.
wouldn't there be a code as to what, you know, where they could, you know, the
That's-
distance
that-
between where they built and
Right,
her house?
that's where you have to have, you know, importantly,
Yeah.
have things like buffers. If someone's putting in
It
an
just seems
industrial
that
use, you put in a
whatever
certain amount of buffer.
administration before, whatever.
And I asked
But
for
a lot of
maps,
things